Are you like me and are seeing some water entry on an exterior door of your home? You can see here it's warping the baseboards. Stick around to see how I figured out how to stop this problem at my house.
Subscribe.
We've lived in this house for several years and this has never been a problem before. Well, as you can see, the water does get through this door now. It pools water on the concrete on the inside of the garage. It's also warping the baseboards. So what happened and how am I going to fix it? Well, back in about the end of September, we installed concrete on the side of our house. All winter long, water has been getting in through this door, and you can see just in a couple of months how bad it's warped the baseboards already. When the concrete was poured, it had to match up with the existing patio in the backyard, and it had to match up with the driveway, which means that the concrete had to go pretty much right underneath this threshold. So there's not much room underneath for the water to go. Even though the angle of this threshold does go away from the door, if it's a heavy rain, water is still getting in. So what am I going to do about it? So what I decided to do was open up this threshold and put some silicone in it. It's going to be watertight, seal off the cracks and the holes and the crevices where water can seep through, and push it back out into the concrete instead of have it come into the garage through these cracks and crevices. Now, because of the framing around the door and the concrete underneath, I can't really take this metal threshold off and replace it with a new one. So on these thresholds, there's these little plugs that you can open up and unscrew to kind of open up this threshold a little. You can see my threshold is already pretty scuffed up from years of opening up the door, but if you wanted to save it, we're going to go ahead and put some painter's tape around these plugs so that we don't scratch the threshold even more. And we're going to grab a device that can slide underneath this threshold plug and pop it off. I just went and grabbed my 5-in-1 painter's tool, which has a pretty sharp edge to slide underneath this little plug. You could also use a razor blade. I would not recommend using a screwdriver really, because you will damage the plug trying to dig underneath. It needs to be something with a sharp edge. And you can see underneath these plugs, there's a little flathead screw that we were going to loosen to pop up the threshold to get underneath it. Once you have popped off one plug, you can just grab your tape and move it to the next plug and keep going. This particular threshold has 4. Once all the threshold plugs have been removed, we're going to now grab our handy dandy Ryobi impact driver with a flathead bit on it, and we're going to loosen up the screw to pop open the threshold a little bit. Now just grabbing that same 5-in-1 tool, and I'm going to pry up the threshold a little bit so I can get some silicone underneath it, and then I'm going to tighten these screws back down. You can see here by loosening those screws, the threshold is popped up a little bit. So let's go ahead and grab some silicone and let's run a bead underneath it, and let's go ahead and tighten down the screws too to kind of squish that silicone in underneath. Before I do all that, I'm going to grab some of this weather stripping and I'm going to pull it out of the way, clean up the area a little bit, get some of the dirt and grime out of that corner so that it doesn't mess up our silicone when we put it on. I decided to grab a screwdriver to kind of get that dirt out of that way, and I'm going to get a paper towel and clean up this area, make it nice and pretty. While I was at it, I decided to do the other side of the threshold as well. In this corner, there's some old caulking. I'm going to cut that out with my 5-in-1 tool so I can clean it up, get all the dirt out, vacuum it, get it nice and clean for new silicone. The silicone I'm going to be using is one that I just happen to already have. It happens to be a tri-polymer waterproof sealant. It's great for wet and dry applications, so let's go ahead and use this. I will put a link to this and all products you see in this video in the video description. The first part I'm going to put silicone in is that place where we lifted up the threshold. I'm going to put a nice thick layer of silicone in there and then smooth it out with my finger later. This is the place where the water is coming in the most likely, so I'm going to make sure I stop it from even getting to this place. With my thick bead of silicone underneath the threshold, now I'm going to go back through and tighten those threshold screws back down to kind of squeeze the silicone down. And then I'll run my finger over again to smooth out the area. I'm trying to build a kind of dam, if you will, with the silicone so that the water would come up and be pushed back in the opposite direction. Now I'm going to focus my silicone efforts into this corner. I'm trying to build up, like I was mentioning, kind of like a dam, a little hill, if you will, so that the water that will try to go up, but it's going to be run back down and go the opposite direction instead of coming into the house. And of course, just doing the exact same thing to the other side. I'm going to run some of the silicone on top of the threshold here as well, kind of seal that little crack. Now going around this edge of the framing that touches the threshold to try to seal that crack as well. Make sure that no water is getting in underneath there and then going underneath the threshold to get into the house that way. Again, repeating for the other side. Now that that's all done, I decided to do another line of beading on the threshold that meets the concrete. I'm just trying to get anywhere that water might possibly be getting in underneath the threshold into the house instead of on the top side of the threshold. Just trying to make sure that all water is stopped. Back inside, now I'm going to run a line of beading of this caulking right underneath the threshold where it meets the concrete in the garage, trying to seal off any holes that might happen to have any entry into the house from the outside. Lastly comes the time of putting the plugs back in the holes for this threshold. I'm just going to push them on with my fingers, and I'm going to grab a mallet and kind of just hammer them down on. And that should do it. It's all siliconed up. Everything is looking great. Now we just need to wait for a rain. And look at this. These storm clouds look really promising. I can't wait to see if the rain that is produced from these clouds will not get into my house. Well, it's been raining outside for a couple hours now, and I went to go check my threshold. You can see the shininess underneath the threshold is actually just the silicone. This isn't actually water coming in. I don't see any water coming in. It's looking great. Well, it's been raining for several hours out there, and we have no water coming in yet. But perhaps this rain isn't good enough rain, so we'll keep watching it. But so far, it's looking good so far, but I don't know if it's been a quality test at this point, but we will see. Well, it's been raining all night long, and I don't see any water entry. This shiny looking stuff is just that silicone. I don't see any water entry. Let's see what it looks like from out the door. All right, we have water up to the edge of the threshold, but nothing has gotten past this caulking area. You can see the water is beating up. But so far, I mean, I don't know if it was a torrential downpour, but I haven't seen any water entry, and it's been raining all night long. So I would say so far, this is a success. Well, it's been raining for about 2 days now, and still there's no water entry. The little shiny glossy stuff you see is the caulk, or the silicone. But no water entry. That's silicone. Just taking a look outside after several days of rain, and the water has come up to the threshold, but nothing has gotten past it. Well, folks, I don't know if you can hear that outside, but it is raining pretty dang hard, and I still don't see any water entry into my garage. Let's open the door and check it out. Now it's like 1:30 in the morning, but I just had to come check it out because it is raining really hard out there. Lightning, thunder. Let's turn this light on outside. So you can see that the ground is wet, and it's certainly raining out here right now. There's some good shot of the rain. But we don't have any water coming up and entering into our door. So it's been raining for 2 days, and it's raining really hard right now. And I do not see any water entry into my garage anymore because of what we just did. So I would say that this is a good method. And the next morning, after all that rain last night, I still am dry. I know it's confusing, that shiny spot is the caulk, or the silicone, guys. There is no water entry. I believe I have solved this problem. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to click that like button, share with your friends and family and pretty much everyone you've ever met. And don't forget to
Subscribe.
subscribe.